Hi, I'm Todd Orchide, CEO of GTL Real Estate. In this video, I'd like to talk about a bill that was recently ratified by the Georgia State Legislature and signed by Governor Kemp. Those of you in Florida shouldn't tune out though, because Florida already has similar legislation on the books. The characterization of this new legislation in Georgia by its authors, numbered as House Bill 346, is that it prohibits retaliation by a landlord against a tenant for taking legitimate actions such as filing a complaint with code enforcement or insisting that their rights under the lease be honored. This sounds all well and good on first listen, but in reality, we expect it instead to cause a rush of new litigation between tenants and landlords, tying up the courts with frivolous cases, delaying evictions, and costing you as a landlord more money in legal fees that are completely unnecessary. Let me start off by saying that we should all expect better from our legislators in Georgia. This state is generally regarded as a conservative, pro-business state. We usually don't have to deal with the ridiculous anti-landlord legislation that goes on in places like California and Oregon. So I was surprised to see this legislation sail through the State House with hardly a hiccup. Granted, there were changes made after some lobbying from some industry groups, and those changes did make it not quite so onerous. But this is still a horrible piece of legislation that will have negative repercussions for property owners in this state. This might be an indication of a scary situation that we'll all have to deal with in the future. As homeowners become a smaller portion of the population and renters a larger portion, lawmakers who are pandering for votes may be looking to appeal to those renters instead of the landlords. We all need to try to prevent that, which I'll talk about in a minute. For now, let me just discuss what's in this bill and why it's such a horrible idea. The new law basically creates a giant loophole for tenants to claim that a landlord is retaliating against them. What could count as retaliation? The law lists several things: filing an eviction, depriving the tenant use of the premises, whatever that's supposed to mean, decreasing services to a tenant, increasing the tenant's rent, terminating the tenant's lease, or, and I quote, materially interfering with the tenant's rights under the lease. Now, if you're thinking that a bunch of that sounds vague and wide open for exploitation by tenants and attorneys of low ethical standards, then you're not alone. It's a mess and it never should have become law. But here we are, and the law has been signed by the governor. There is a bunch of language in the law that creates a bunch of exceptions for when the landlord can't be found to have retaliated, even if he does any of those things I mentioned. Industry lobbyists worked to get these exceptions put into the law when it became clear that the lawmakers weren't going to just table the proposal. The problem, of course, is that you have to actually go to court to make those arguments if the tenant files a claim. So while you'll have a defense to use under the law, as you know, it's expensive to hire an attorney just to show up in court to make those legal arguments and prevail. This is really bad for landlords who don't have property managers, because it means they will themselves have to show up in court to testify, as an attorney can argue a case for you, but they can't give testimony for you. This is just one more reason why you should hire a professional to manage your property. If you've got a professional property manager, they'll take care of all of this for you. But if you're an individual landlord without a property manager, you'll be the one in court yourself having to deal with this. But to make matters worse, some of these exceptions aren't very well written. For example, one exception says that increasing the tenant's rent can't be considered retaliation if the rent increase is part of a pattern of rent increases for an entire multi-unit residential complex. Why is this limited only to multi-unit complexes? If you're a landlord or a property management company with hundreds of units and you can show a pattern of rent increases across your entire portfolio, why are you not protected by this provision while an apartment complex is? I'm not sure if this was just an oversight by the lawmakers or if they actually intended to screw over the single-family landlords, as they seem to have done. Now, with all of this said, this isn't the end of the world. If you're working with us, we have a small army of attorneys that we keep on retainer at several law firms in both Georgia and Florida. We'll be able to go to court to protect you to the greatest extent possible from this legislation if a tenant tries to make a claim under it. And honestly, most tenants won't try to make a claim because they won't know about the law, and most tenants aren't trying to play those kinds of games. But some of you will have to deal with this with the occasional bad tenant. So, what should you do? Write to your state House representative and your state senator. Also, write to Governor Kemp. Tell them that as a landlord, you're very unhappy that House Bill 346 was ratified and that you want to see it repealed. Tell them that landlords are their voters too, not just tenants, and they need to look out for your interest. Remind them that landlords are not a bunch of rich 1%ers who have unlimited funds to deal with this stuff, as some of them apparently seem to think. Tell them that the average landlord owns 1 or 2 rental houses and relies upon the rent income to pay their expenses, and you can't afford a bunch of legal fees to fight frivolous lawsuits that are caused by needless regulations. Is it likely to make a difference and get this law repealed? Honestly, no, this law is here to stay. To paraphrase President Reagan, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government regulation. But if lawmakers hear from a bunch of angry landlords, they're likely to think twice before they take up another piece of anti-landlord legislation down the line. We just need to remind them that we're a sizable voting bloc, so they don't forget about us. I know many of you don't like politics, and especially in today's era of nonstop 24-hour news coverage, when you can't seem to avoid politics on TV, writing an email to your state representatives about a law they just passed doesn't sound like a lot of fun. But as landlords, we all need to remember that our rental property investments are only valuable if we can prevent our states from becoming renter states like California, with the laws all heavily weighted against landlords. Nobody is going to California to buy rental property as an investor because the laws make it entirely undesirable. We don't want Georgia and Florida to become like that. In order to prevent it, we have to be politically active and tell our representatives that we expect them to look out for our interests. If you have any questions about this new law or anything else, or if you're just interested in hiring us to manage your property, please send us an email at support@gtlrealestate.com.